So, when you think of seed planting, are you willing to plant your seed where the one who gave you that seed intends for you to plant it? Or do you want to shoot aimlessly and pretend like your seed doesn't have eternal value? Well, seed is eternal because the seed that was released, 80 million, in fact, was headed towards the egg, your mother's egg, and you were that seed chosen. So there was an intentionality because God chose you before you ever knew what it looked like to be an earthling. So with that being said, we're here to describe what it looks like to plant intentional seed. Gardeners know what they're planting and they know what's going to come up. The harvest that comes up isn't even a question to them. They know the harvest is going to come up. They just don't know when it's going to come up. They believe for the rain and the harvest will come. You plant a seed, you water the seed's germinating, you cultivate that, and you will see a harvest. So if you plant your seed with intentionality and purpose, you will see fruitfulness and you will see multiplication. You put your seed out in times of loneliness, in times of desperation, when you're drawn to darkness, all you'll have is deeper emotional bondage, emotional baggage, and you'll have deeper levels of loneliness. And it will take you away from the one who put that seed in you to plant into the woman or into the woman that you were ordained for. You were created for one. And that one gave himself for you and put his seed in you so that you could be pure and without blemish and without spot. And you could be a chaste virgin, one that's never been with the world, and you can repent for the times that you tied your soul to another when you planted your seed prior to marriage. And then you can begin to plant your seed intentionally in the one that God's purposed for you from the beginning. And when you intentionally plant your seed, you will see fruitfulness. You will see a new creation vibration come forth, because you will no longer be of the seed that spills everywhere. You'll be of the seed that goes exactly where it belongs, and you will see what God intended from the beginning. Every time you plant your seed, you will experience the emotions that God intended for you to experience. You will experience the fulfillment God intended for you to experience, and you will know what it looks like to be loved and to know how far your Father reached when he brought you to himself through his Son, the seed that came into the ground and died and did not abide alone, but it died to bear much fruit.
Wow. Yeah, there's nothing more degrading to a man than masturbation. When God created the marriage covenant for intentional seed planting to produce godly offspring, God created sex for a number of things, to produce godly offspring, for pleasure between one man and one woman in a marriage covenant. And that's the glory of the marriage bed. The glory of the marriage covenant is intentionally planting, the husband intentionally planting his seed into his bride, which is a picture of Christ and the church. When we're born again, the seed of Christ comes inside of us. His seed is planted and produces life.
Yes. Amen.
And we will be the intentional seed planters that will not give in to pornography, that will not give in to magazines, that will not give in to quick fixes, to temporal satisfaction,
Right.
to needing to feel better through instant gratification. We are those that will allow his control within us to captivate us to the point where we have self-control and then we will allow him to steer our reins. We'll allow him to take us where we belong, and we will hold back from all those other things, because God's grace is sufficient and his power is made perfect in weakness. And when we confess our weakness to him, that we need to plant our seed somewhere because we're feeling lonely, because we need to get off, we will stop in our tracks and we will see the seed that he planted when he put himself in the womb of the virgin, when he impregnated the virgin and he broke through the veil and he came to earth, and he intentionally did it in that fashion.
Yes.
Because man was corrupted from the fall, and man put their seed in the woman and reproduced after the corruptible seed that had continuously brought corruption. And humanity was so scarred by this corruption, so marred from their identity, that even in Genesis 6 or 7, God said that he was even sorrowful that he had created man. And man was reproducing after the sin nature, so the man's seed line was infested, and he was impregnating woman, and woman was giving birth to children that were born into bondage. So the very seed that came into the virgin womb, that came out of the virgin womb in the opposite fashion that man had planted seed to reproduce, we see that the great divine reversal was that of Christ breaking through from the other angle and destroying the limitations of the seed line curse, to take all those things that had come through the fall and bring us back into our rightful inheritance as sons and daughters of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, who not only puts his seed in us, but causes that seed to spring forth, to sprout up as an oak of righteousness, where God literally plants himself in us to display his splendor through us, so that the branches that are on our tree would bear much fruit, and people would eat from our tree, and they would reproduce after the seed within that fruit. And we would see the incredible multiplication of a God that plants his seed with purpose and that has many sons in mind. He said, if one son dies, many sons will come alive. So I will plant my seed into the virgin, so that that seed can come out and become flesh, and that flesh would live 33 years without sin, and then that flesh would give himself willingly, surrender himself to hell's flame, surrender himself to bondage and corruption, and suddenly give himself to death, give himself to the burial where he goes under the ground and dies, only to rise up to newness of life. He gave himself as a seed, intentionally planted himself in the ground, knowing many sons would spring forth from the tree, the oak of righteousness that he was, because he was crucified to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, to put an axe to the root of corruption, to put an axe to the root of distortion. And he brings us back into harmony, where the seed, the sperma, the testa, the seed coat, the very thing that's inside the seed, because what the seed carries is the image of the tree. So inside that seed is the image of the tree, and he saw inside the seed of his son the image of the true born again, new creation, new breed, new people group that would come forth as a result of sowing the one seed. He knew all along the fruit of righteousness would manifest from one being right standing with the Father to many being right standing through his righteousness granted because of his willingness to surrender everything, so that all could come and receive the spirit of adoption that cries out, Abba, Father.